Hi, I'm Effie and I'm going to be doing HRCYED. So HRCYED is the hardest reading challenge you've ever done. This is the third year that this reading challenge has taken place and the first year I'm participating in it. So I will link the original video down below which has all the information for if you wanted to join in. This reading challenge runs from the 7th of July to the 7th of July, so it's starting in just a couple of days and I am stressed about it starting. So HRCYED is a bingo board based reading challenge, 25 squares, but each square has multiple prompts within it, which ends up with 150 prompts. Books can be doubled up, but they can't be tripled up or anything else, so there's a minimum of 75 books that have to be read for the challenge. I've doubled up a handful of mine, but I haven't doubled up as many as I could have. So I've really taken on a challenge here. So bingo box 1 is choose your party. And this prompt involves picking 5 D&D classes and picking books based on those. My first pick for Fighter is The Butcher's Masquerade by Matt Dinnerman. This is the 5th book in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series. I'm not going to go too in depth of any of the Dungeon Crawler Carl books I've got on this list because I've only read up to book 3 and I don't want to spoil any of the future books for myself, but the series follows Carl, who is participating in an intergalactically televised dungeon, which humans have been offered the chance to participate in after aliens invaded the Earth. And I've chosen this because Carl is a fighter type throughout the series. For Cleric, I have picked A Particularly Nasty Case by Adam Kay, and this is about a doctor who is suspicious about the circumstances of the death of another doctor and suspects foul play, and I've chosen this because clerics tend to be a support or healer role within D&D. And then for Bard, I have picked Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux. This follows Christine Daae, whose famous musician father died, and she was raised in the Paris Opera House, where she was taught how to sing by a ghost, who becomes jealous and violent as the story goes on, and I've picked this for Bard as Bards are a music-based class. For Paladin, I have picked Disobedience by Naomi Alderman. This follows a woman who has left behind her Orthodox Jewish community, but is called back when her father, the community rabbi, dies. And I've chosen that for Paladin, as Paladins tend to have oaths dedicated to deities. They're not always dedicated to deities, but it tends to have a very religious leaning meaning to it. Also, you've got Oathbreaker Paladins, which feels equivalent to me to like leaving religion behind. And then for Rogue, I quite literally went a bit rogue with this one because I couldn't really think of a book that fit rogues specifically. So I instead chose to base it upon one of my own characters, Lola, who is just a really badass woman, and so I decided to pick a book with a badass female character. So I picked Codename Villanelle, which follows Villanelle, a skilled assassin, and Eve, the former MI6 operative who's tasked with tracking her down. So square 2 is periodic table, and for this square you have to pick 5 books which titles contain elements of the periodic table. So first I have Silver Nitrate by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is about a Mexican filmmaker who believes he is cursed, and that is why his career disappeared, and so he recruits the help of a sound operator and a soap opera star to try and help him save his career from this curse. Then I've picked Titanium Noir by Nick Harkaway. This follows a detective who's been tasked with a case of homicide where a titan, which is a godlike elite, has been killed, and he has to unravel the complicated threads that led to this unimaginable murder. Next, I've chosen Altered Carbon by Richard K. Morgan. This is set in a world where people's consciousnesses can be digitally transferred between bodies, and a convict is recruited to find out who killed the last body of a billionaire. And then Seasons of Glass and Iron by Amal El-Motar. I just copied part of the story description for this because it just sounds beautiful. Exquisitely told and sharply observed tales about life as it is, was, and could be. I believe this is a short story collection, so I don't really have much to tell you about the book, but I loved This Is How You Lose a Time War, which was co-written by the same author, so I'm excited to read more of her writing. Chlorine by Jade Song, which follows a woman whose whole life is swimming. Every bit of her life revolves around the pool and she dreams of being a mermaid. And then we have Familial Terms. So this is 5 books with 5 different familial terms in the title. So first I've got Our Wives Under the Sea. A woman returns from a deep-sea expedition which ends in catastrophe, and when she comes back, her wife feels like she's slipping from her grasp. Next, I have The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter by Theodora Goss. This book follows Mary Jekyll, whose parents have died. She's curious about the mystery of Edward Hyde and her father's past, and recruits the help of Sherlock and John Watson to help her find out more about them. And then I have Husband Material by Alexis Hall. This is book 2 in the London Calling trilogy, which follows Luke and Oliver, who after the first book, Boyfriend Material, are now feeling the social pressures to get married. Then I've got Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is set when humans have left Earth and travel to a new world that has been prepared for them, and they find it all perfectly landscaped and terraformed for humanity. But when they get there, they find out another civilization is already living there. And then finally for this prompt, I have Son of the Morning by Akwaeke Emezi. This follows a woman who has always felt different and not like she doesn't fit in. And one day she meets Lucifer, undercover as security for her friend's family. And as soon as she meets him, she knows that he's different. But what she doesn't know that he does is that she is also not human. So the next bingo box is Choose Your Curriculum. So this is where you have to pick 5 subjects and 5 books that fit within them. So for history, I've gone with the Iliad by Homer, which it feels stupid to synopsize this one, but it's a Greek epic poem chronicling the last 10 years of the Trojan War. And then for physics, I've picked Storm in a Teacup by Helen Chersky. And this is an introduction to the world of physics and how physics is used in our day-to-day lives. For social studies, I've picked Chavs by Owen Jones. And this is about how the working class of Britain are constantly demonised by the media. For art, I've picked For Art and For Life by Van Gogh, which is a collection of Van Gogh's letters that tell the story of his personal journey and his creative journey. And for English, I've picked Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams, which is about a Jamaican British woman who works at a national newspaper, struggling with a messy breakup and constantly comparing herself to her white middle-class co-workers. The next bingo square is to pick 5 books that take place in 5 different states that are not New York or California. I am really grateful to some random Reddit thread for this one because someone had asked about different books for different states, and there was a huge list state by state of different books set in each state. It was so helpful. So for Ohio, I picked Beloved by Toni Morrison. This follows Setha, who was born a slave, has escaped to Ohio, but is stuck with the memories of her past, and her new home is haunted by the ghost of her baby. Next, for Oklahoma, I have The Outsider by Stephen King. And yes, I am as shocked as you that Stephen King has a book that wasn't set in Maine. This book follows a case of a boy's body being discovered and fingerprints and eyewitnesses all pointing towards the local English teacher and Little League coach. For Virginia, I have Flowers in the Attic by Virginia Andrews. This is about a mother who keeps her 4 children locked away so she can receive a large inheritance when their grandfather passes away, and about their experiences living locked in this one room for their lives. For Louisiana, I've got Interview with a Vampire, which follows Louis, recounts his story from how he met Lestat, who turned him into a vampire, and his time living as a vampire. Then but for Pennsylvania, I have Jackal by Erin E. Adams, which follows Liz, who returns to her predominantly white hometown for her best friend's wedding. And the day of the wedding, their daughter goes missing, which reminds Liz of when she was younger, the only other black girl in her class also went missing in a similar fashion, and only to be found dead. And she doesn't think this is a coincidence. Next is Regional Traipsing. So this is going through different regions of the world with different books. So first for Swana, which is Southwest Asia and Northern Africa, I've picked Minor Detail by Adania Shibli. This follows a woman in Palestine who becomes obsessed with a small piece of Palestinian history about a woman who was brutally captured, tortured and murdered by Israeli soldiers. For the Mediterranean, I have The Odyssey by Homer, which follows Odysseus' journey home from the Trojan War. For the Caribbean, I have Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys. This is inspired by Jane Eyre and tells a pre-colonial retelling of the story of the mad woman in the attic. For South Asia, I have Kidnap the Rich by Raoul Reina, which follows a man who grew up poor and starts making money by taking tests on behalf of rich people's children. One of these children becomes a celebrity from his university entrance exams. Ramesh decides to try and use this to his advantage, but it ends up in them both getting kidnapped. But he outwits the criminals and manages to escape and becomes a kidnapper himself. And for East Asia, I have Before I Knew I Loved You by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, and this is book 6 in the Before the Coffee Gets Cold series, which each book takes place in a cafe in Japan where you can travel in time, and each book follows 4 separate stories of people who have come to the cafe to travel. The next prompt is Bookception, so this is picking one book and then following it up with a book that is mentioned within that book. So for the first book, I have The 13th Tale. This follows a woman who spent 6 decades of her life writing stories and finally decided to sit down with a biographer to tell the truth of her own story. And then within this book is mentioned Jane Eyre, which I was really hoping to be able to squeeze into this, because Jane Eyre is my July book club book for a book club I run with my friend. It's called Virtual Book Club, and if you want to join it, you are more than welcome to. There is a link down below for that. So Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte is the gothic tale of Jane, an orphan who had a tragic childhood but found happiness when she became a governess, where she falls in love with the master, Mr. Rochester. Next is the secret prompts. So these are 12 standalone prompts that were released individually in last year's HRCYED, and this year they are just set out from the outset. Because they're not secrets anymore. So the first one is to read a book outside, which I have not picked yet because I'm very much a mood reader, and so I need a day where the weather's nice enough to go and read outside, and a book that I want to read outside to pick for this. So I'm just going to pick this on the day I decide to do it. So next is pun in the title, and for this I've chosen Beach Bodies by Sienna Sharp, which follows a woman who closes down her successful business every summer to go and be a lifeguard at a resort on a Caribbean island, trying not to draw too much attention to herself, because that's the last thing you want when you're a murderer. And then the next one is Hobby or Craft. I was considering looking for a book with a hobby or craft in it, but I was also trying to just check things off of my physical TBR, and I don't think I have anything like that on there. But I do have a lot of hobbies, like too many maybe. So I've also left this one empty as one that I can fill in when the time comes, when I'm in the mood to sit down and crochet and listen to an audiobook. Next is a book with a first and last name in the title, and I've picked Actual Age Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. So this is book 3 in the Brown Sisters, and this one follows Eve, who is a hot mess. And after ruining an expensive wedding, her parents decide to cut her off and make her take some responsibility. And she gets rejected for the job as a chef in a B&B, but she manages to hit the B&B owner with her car, and while he is recovering from a broken arm, she is trying to be helpful and help around the B&B. Next is I'll Get Around to It Later, which was a selection of 7 prompts in HRCYED 2, but for this one you only had to pick one of them, and I picked a book I've been procrastinating. So for this I picked S, or Ship of Theseus, by J.J. Abrams and Doug Dorst, which is a story told within the margins of a book about a man who is on a ship with a monstrous crew. Such a confusing one to describe, because this one is told through notes in the margins and little inserts and things like that. And I think I've mainly been putting it off just because I don't want to lug that around with me. I don't want to lose any of the inserts. So that's one where I'm going to need a couple of days at home to just sit and appreciate it. Next is duplicate titles. So to a book that has the same title as another book. For this one, I just used the example, which was Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, because it's got basically the same name as The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. This is about a nameless narrator who grows up in a black community in the South, who gets expelled from college and moves to New York, and becomes the spokesman for the Harlem branch of the Brotherhood. Next is a childhood miss. So this is a book you didn't read growing up, and I have picked Watership Down by Richard Adam. This is about a community of rabbits who are on a journey through harrowing trials and predators to leave the certain destruction of their home to find a mysterious promised land. Next is Joseph's Coat. So this is a book with a colour in the title that is in the song about Joseph's coat and Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. And I picked The Colour Purple by Alice Walker. This is an epistolary style novel told about 2 sisters. Begins with letters between one of the sisters and God, and then 2 letters between the sisters themselves, who were separated after one of them was forced into an abusive marriage. Next is Doom Scroll. So this is a book found while doom scrolling. And I did try and have like an actual doom scroll to find a book when I first decided to join this, and literally nothing came up. But apparently my Instagram is all cute puppies and Pokemon cards. So I didn't find anything like in that moment, but then I remembered I do have a book that I saw while doom scrolling, and that is Gone for Good by Sarah Crossan, which follows Connie, who is taken from her home in the middle of the night to a facility for troubled teens. And then movement on the cover. So this is a cover that has an action taking place on it. So like the cover image is an action. And for that I've chosen The Eye of the Bedlam Bride by Matt Dinnerman, which is book 6 in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series. And then most recent acquisition, I've got The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells, which technically is and technically isn't, because when I wrote this list, it was my most recent acquisition, but I have bought some books for this list since then. But this was kind of a grey area, because I bought a H.G. Wells bind up book, a book that was binding up like 6 H.G. Wells books, and so I just picked one off of that because I've already read half of the binder. I'm not setting 3 books for 1 prompt and a 150 prompt reading challenge. This follows a man who is shipwrecked on an island run by Dr. Moreau that's full of mysterious creatures. And then for the author's last name is a first name, I've picked Feed by Mira Grant. And this is set in a time after humanity has cured cancer and has cured the common cold. A new virus begins taking over that gives people one command: feed. And 20 years after the breakout of the virus, 2 bloggers are on the trail behind the conspiracy of the infected. So next for book cover styles, so 4 different books with 4 different cover styles. So first for Real People, I've got The Time Traveller's Wife. This is the story of Claire and her husband Henry. And Henry has been diagnosed with a disorder which causes him to be displaced throughout time. For cartoon cover, I picked Falling Hard for the Royal Guard by Megan Clawson, and this follows Maggie, who decides she isn't ready to give up on love after a chance encounter with one of the Royal Guard. Then for a book with a pattern, I've picked 20,000 Leagues Beneath the Sea by Jules Verne, and this is about 3 men who embark on a fantastical undersea adventure with Captain Nemo. And for a big symbol on the cover, I've picked Feed by Mira Grant, which I've already covered. And next is Titular Counting. So this is books with different amount of words on the cover, so you start with 1 word and go up to 10. So I started with Chavs by Owen Jones, which I've already covered. Strange Houses by Yuketsu is about a writer who's approached by an acquaintance who has recently purchased a home, and they discover that the floor plan has a mysterious dead space between the walls, and when they take the floor plan to an architect, they discover more strange places dotted around the house. Next is Be Right Back by Bill Wood. So this is a sequel to Let's Split Up, set a year later. At the Hallowed Fall Fest, people are dropping dead and clues are being left with them, and the gang has to follow the clues, leading them deeper into the mystery. Next is A Parade of Horribles by Matt Dinnerman, and this is the 8th book in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series. And then I have The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells, which again I have already covered, and The Eye of the Bedlam Bride by Matt Dinnerman, which again is book 6 in Dungeon Crawler Carl. And then I have Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab. This book intertwines the stories of 3 lesbian vampires living in different eras of time. And then I have The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, which is a space opera following the crew of the Wayfarer, and in the depths of space they face unexpected mishaps and thrilling adventures. And then I have My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry by Frederick Backman, and we're going to ignore the fact that this book absolutely has a different title in England because it doesn't work for the prompt then, so I'm sticking with this one. And this is about a girl called Elsa whose grandmother passes away and leaves a series of letters for Elsa to distribute, apologising to people for different things. And then finally for this prompt I have I'm Starting to Worry About This Black Box of Doom by Jason Pargin, and this is about a man who is paid $20,000 to transform a woman and a box across the US from LA to Washington DC, and he has to follow a set of rules. While they're on the road, rumours begin to spread that this is an elaborate terrorist attack. And next is character names into author names. So this is the main character of the first book is the author's name in the next book. So first I've got The 13 Problems by Agatha Christie, which follows Jane Marple after the Tuesday night club gather to challenge her to solve unsolved crimes. So with the author called Jane, I've gone with Emma by Jane Austen, which follows Emma, who is a rich, privileged young woman who believes herself to be an excellent matchmaker and sets out to assist the lower class Harriet. And then with the name Emma, I've gone with Slags by Emma Jane Unsworth, which follows sisters Sarah and Juliet as they go on a whiskey-fueled road trip across Scotland to celebrate Juliet's birthday. And then it is Title Shiratori, which is where the last letter of the first title is the first letter of the next title. So first I've gone with Washington Black by S.E. Edijan, and this is about an 11-year-old slave, Washington, or Wash, who is chosen to be the master's brother's manservant. So it's surprised to find out that Christopher, the master's brother, is an inventor, an explorer, and an abolitionist. But when a man is killed, a bounty is placed on Washington's head, and he and Christopher must abandon everything. Next, I've gone with Kindred by Octavia E. Butler, which follows a black woman in 1976 who dreams of being a writer, but is pulled back in time to an 1815 Maryland plantation. And then I've got Disillusion by Nicholas Binge, which follows a woman called Maggie who has spent the last decade caring for her husband who is losing his memory. And then one day, someone turns up on the doorstep and reveals to her that he isn't losing his memory. His memories are being taken away to contain a secret. And then I have 9 Liars by Maureen Johnson, and this is book 5 in the Truly Devious series. This follows Stevie, after solving the mystery of Truly Devious at Ellingham Academy, goes to England and is introduced to a double murder case from 1995, where 5 friends went to a country house and played a drunken game of hide and seek, and the next day 2 of them were found dead. And then I have Solaris by Stanislaw Lem, which is is about Kelvin, who arrives at a research station for the planet Solaris, and he discovers that the planet is having a psychological impact on the crew that are already there. The next prompt is the HRCYED mashup. So this is where you pick one prompt from year 1 and one prompt from year 2 and mash them up together to make a new prompt. So my picks were from each book from a different country that isn't the US, the UK or Canada, and that has been adapted into a different piece of media. So for a movie from Sweden, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson, which is about a journalist and a hacker who are hired to find out what happened to a woman 40 years after she disappeared. And then for a modern retelling from Haiti, I've picked Pride by Ibi Zoboi, which is a modern retelling of Pride and Prejudice from the perspective of a black woman in Brooklyn. And then I have a book that was adapted into a TV show and is from Japan, and that is Ring by Koji Suzuki, which is also the book that the 8 different The Ring films is based on. And this follows a journalist whose 17-year-old niece dies, and he finds out that other teenagers have died in the same mysterious circumstances, and finds out they were all at the same cabin together. And he goes to the cabin and discovers a videotape in the cabin with a message at the end that those who have viewed these images are fated to die at this exact hour 1 week from today. And so he's on a race against time to find out the causes of the teenagers' deaths before it's too late for him. Next is a book that has been adapted to a musical from France, and that is Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux, which I've already covered. And finally is a book that has been adapted into a play, and it's from Afghanistan, and that is The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini, which follows Amir, who is determined to win the local kite flying competition with the help of his close friend Hassan. But that afternoon, something unforeseeable happens to Hassan that will change their lives forever. Next is titled Digits. So this is titles with the digits 1 to 10 and another number in them. First is A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. This is an essay exploring the historical and social limitations placed upon women. Next is Ready Player 2 by Ernest Cline, which is the sequel to Ready Player 1. After winning Oasis, Wade discovers a technological advancement that will make Oasis more wonderful, but his life and the future of Oasis are at stake. Next is My Train Leaves at 3 by Natalie Guerrero, which follows Xiomara, who gets a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to audition for a popular director, but she grapples with the dilemma of carving out a new life for herself without losing the one that she's leaving behind. And then I have A Sign of Thought by Arthur Conan Doyle, which is the second book in the Sherlock Holmes series. 4 years after her father vanished, Mary began receiving exquisite gifts every single year. This year has received a letter inviting her to meet her mysterious benefactor, and she urges Sherlock Holmes and John Watson to accompany her. And then I have the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin, which follows Essan, who comes home to find her husband murdered and that her son has kidnapped her daughter. The empire is collapsing and a rift is being torn into the heart of the earth, spewing ash that darkens the sky. Essan must pursue her family through the dying land to save her daughter, whatever it takes. 6 Must Die by Victoria Vlossett. A year after an escape room fire tragically killed one of her friends, Steffi receives an invite to go to the new escape room, giving her the opportunity to get some answers. She's reunited with her former friends who each have a reason for accepting the invites, and Steffi must uncover all of their secrets before the mastermind behind the game kills them all. 7, I've got The 7 Moons of Mali Almeida by Seyhan Karunatilaka, which follows Mali, who wakes up dead in what seems to be a celestial visa office with no idea who killed him. In the afterlife, he has 7 moons to contact the man and woman he loved most and lead them to hidden photos that will rock Sri Lanka. And then for 8, I've got 381 by Aaliyah Whiteley. In 2314, Rowena stumbles across a story from 2024 and is drawn into the mystery of the story and questions her own choices. And then I have Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, where the Emperor has invited the heirs to his loyal houses to a deadly trial of wit and skill. If Harrowhark succeeds, she will become immortal and all-powerful, but she cannot do it without her childhood nemesis Gideon. Then I have 10 minutes and 38 seconds in This Strange World by Elif Shaka, which is the story of Layla in the 10 minutes after her death through her oxygen-deprived consciousness. And finally for this prompt, I picked Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, which follows a World War II bombardier who wants to be grounded from a dangerous mission, but is trapped by a paradoxical military rule. And then we have rainbow titles, so this is books with different colours in the title. So first I've picked Red, White and Royal Blue, The Royal Correspondence as my book for Red, and this is by Casey McQuiston, which is a novella made up of letters between Henry and Alex in the 20 years since Red, White and Royal Blue. And then Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit by Jeanette Winterson, which is a semi-biographical story about Jeanette, who grew up raised by an evangelical Pentecostal family, but her life changes when she falls in love with another woman, but has to choose between her religion and her authentic identity. Next is A Game in Yellow by Hailey Piper. This is about a couple who try to spice up their sex life, but it leads them down a path of madness. Then I have Snot Girl Volume 1, Green Hair Don't Care by by Brian Lee O'Malley. This is a reread for me, but I read it a very long time ago. And this follows Lottie, who is a social media star, but her life behind the scenes is crumbling. And then I have Blueberries by Alina Savage. This is a series of essays about capitalism, desire, and feminism. And then The Woman in the Purple Skirt by Natsuko Imamura. And this is about a woman in a purple skirt who sits on a park bench every day, but unbeknownst to her, she's being watched by the woman in the yellow cardigan, who lures her into a job as a housekeeper at the hotel she also works at. And all eyes are on the woman in the purple skirt when she begins an affair with the boss, while no one pays any attention to the woman in the yellow cardigan. Then Pink Slime by Fernanda Torres, where an algae bloom has poisoned the air flowing in from the sea, and a secretive corporation is pumping out the only food that anyone can afford to eat: a mysterious pink sludge. And as conditions deteriorate, she's committed to taking care of her remaining relationships, even if it means being left behind. Next is Against White Feminism by Rafia Zakaria. And this is a book about the necessity of intersectionality in feminism, rather than focusing on middle-class white women. Then I've picked Washington Black, which I've already covered again. How Much of These Hills is Gold by C. Pam Jung. And this follows Lucy and Sam, whose father dies in the night. With their mother already gone, they are orphaned children of immigrants in a land that refutes their existence. So they flee the threats of their western mining town and set off to bury their father in the only way that will set them free from their past. And then I picked Silver Nitrate by Sylvia Marino Garcia again, and again, I've already covered that one. Next is Taxonomical Animal Families. So this is different types of animals on the cover. So first I've got The Butcher's Masquerade, which is Dungeon Crawler Carl book 5, because of Donut the Cat. And then for canines, I've picked My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry by Frederick Backman, as this has a dog on the cover. And then The Species That Rabbits Is, but I have no idea how to pronounce. I've picked Watership Down by Richard Adams, which I've again already covered. Then for Reptile, I've picked Ninth House by Lee Bardugo. Hi, future editing Effie here. Apparently I forgot how to talk around this portion of the video, going by the family of animals that rabbits is, and whatever the hell I tried to say in this section. So I'm just gonna leave you with a picture of the book and voice over this section. By age 20, Alex has dropped out of school early and entered the world of shady drug dealer boyfriends and dead-end jobs, and is the sole survivor of an unsolved homicide. But she's offered a second chance by a mysterious benefactor to go to Yale and monitor the activities of Yale's secret societies. Next is Cephalopods, and for that I've picked Other Minds by Peter Godfrey Smith, and this is a non-fiction about the intelligence of cephalopods. And finally for amphibians, I've picked How to Kill Your Family by Bella Mackie, which is about Grace, who finds out her absentee millionaire father rejected her mother's plea for help on her deathbed, so Grace undertakes revenge, setting about to kill every member of her family. Next is Landscapes and Biomes, so this is books that are set in different landscapes or biomes. For deserts, I've picked Children of June by Frank Herbert. This is book 3 in the June series, and this follows Leto and Ganima, the twin children of Paul Atreides, and Paul has disappeared into the desert wastelands of Arrakis 9 years prior, and they possess the same supernatural abilities that he does, making them valuable to their manipulative aunt Aaliyah, who is ruling the empire in the name of the House Atreides. And then for suburbia, I've got The Stepford Wives by Ira Levin, and this follows Joanna and her family who moved to this town of Stepford, but it all seems too good to be true, and the town hides a terrible secret so shattering that no one who ever encounters it will ever be the same. For aquatic, I've picked Rolling in the Deep by Mira Grant. This is the prequel to Into the Drowning Deep, and this follows the Atargatis, the ship that is sent on a voyage to the Marianas Trench to film a mockumentary about mermaids. For mountains, I have picked Picnic at the Hanging Rock by Joan Lindsay, and this is where all the girls at a college for young ladies in 1900 decide to go on a picnic at Hanging Rock, and 3 of the girls decide to climb the monolith after lunch, never to be seen again. For an urban setting, I've picked High Rise by J.G. Ballard, which is about a class war erupting in a luxurious apartment block. And for beach, I have picked Sag Harbor by Colson Whitehead, which is about a black teenager who goes to a mostly white prep school, who escapes in the summers to Sag Harbor, a community created by African American professionals to be an all-black refuge. Next is Remix It. So this is different types of adaptations based on other books. So for alternate universe, I've got Cinderella is Dead. This is 200 years after Cinderella found her prince. Teen girls are required to attend an annual ball for the men of the kingdom to select their wives, and the girls who aren't selected are never seen again. And Sophia decides to flee the ball and meets the last known descendant of Cinderella, who vows to help her take down the king. For Gender Bent, I have picked Sing Me Forgotten by Jessica S. Olsen, and this is a gender-bent retelling of Phantom of the Opera, following an outcast able to manipulate memories through magic, who is saved by the opera house owner with a deal that she will stay hidden and use her powers to manipulate ticket sales for him. For a villain POV, Sea Witch by Sarah Henning, and this is based on The Little Mermaid, and this is about Evie, an outcast in a fishing town, who is hiding the secret of her magic when another girl shows up who bears an uncanny resemblance to her dead childhood best friend, and this girl who shows up is keeping her own secret. Next is a different POV, and I've selected Julia by Sandra Newman, which is Julia's perspective on the story of 1984. And for the OG's fanfic, I've picked Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys, because this is based on Jane Eyre. So next is the food pyramid. So this is 5 books with 5 different food types on the cover. For beverage, I've got Before I Knew I Loved You by Toshikazu Kawaguchi again. And then for fruit, I've got What Was She Thinking by Zoe Heller, which is about a lonely school teacher called Barbara who reveals more than she intends when she records the story of her best friend's affair with a pupil. And then for fungi, What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. This is about Alex, who receives a message that their childhood friend is dying, and so goes to the ancestral home of the Usher and finds nightmare fungal growth and possessed wildlife, and with the help of a mycologist must reveal the secrets of the house of Usher before it consumes them all. Then for protein, I've got Night Bitch by Rachel Yoder, and this is about a stay-at-home mother who is convinced she is literally turning into a dog. Her husband is away for work and dismisses all of her concerns, while she struggles to resist the temptation to give in to these canine instincts. And then for sweets or desserts, I've got Kiss Slay Replay by Rachel Harrison, and this is about Willa, who is at her best friend's wedding and really hits it off with one of the groomsmen, but they are interrupted by a masked killer terrorising the wedding, and the killer is unrelenting and Willa does not survive until she wakes up again on the morning of her best friend's wedding. As the day unfolds, she wonders whether it was just a bad dream, deja vu, or something more sinister. So Square 20 is weather on the cover. So this is 6 books with 6 different natural phenomenons. So for Thunderstorm, I've got The Troop by Nick Cutter, which is about a scout troop who is taken on their annual 3-day camping trip, where they are intruded upon by a shockingly thin, pale man who is the human carrier of a bioengineered infection. For Sunny, I've got Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro, which is about Clara, who is an artificial friend who hopes she will be chosen by a customer, but she is one that she shouldn't invest too much into the promise of humans. For Rain, I have All the Little Raindrops by Mia Sheridan. This is about Noelle and Evan, who get kidnapped. Despite sharing a tragic past that should make them enemies, they work together to escape. And years later, Evan is a private investigator and reaches out to Noelle to help him close this case. For Fog, I've got We Ate the Dark by Mallory Pearson, which is set 5 years after Sophia went missing and her body is found, so the woman closest to her set out to get justice for her. For Snow, I've got 6 Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. This follows Princess Shiori, who possesses forbidden magic, but on the morning of her betrothal ceremony, she loses control, and her stepmother, who is also a sorcerer, banishes her from the kingdom and turns her brothers into cranes and warns Shiori that if anyone finds out what happened to her, one of her brothers will die. And for the Northern Lights, I've got All the White Spaces by Ali Wilkes, and this follows a trans man in 1920 who joins an Arctic expedition following the trauma of World War I. The next square is It's Your Birthday, so each of these relate to your birthday in some way. So for Birthstone, I picked Titanium Noir by Nick Harkaway because it has a green cover and my birthstone is Peridot. For Birth Month publication, I did The 5th Season by N.K. Jemisin. Then for Zodiac, I decided to go with After the Funeral by Agatha Christie, which is about Poirot being called on to solve the murder of a brother and sister because Cora is murdered, and the day before was her brother's funeral, and on that day she made a comment. It's been hushed up very nicely, but he was murdered, wasn't he? And I chose that for this prompt because me and Agatha Christie have the same star sign. Then for Chinese Zodiac, mine is a rabbit, so I picked a book with a rabbit on the cover, and I picked Mrs. Death by Selena Godden, and this is about Mrs. Death, who is exhausted after a lifetime of facilitating human endings and enlists the help of a young troubled writer to create a memoir. And then my birth flower is Poppy, so I chose Ozma of Oz by L. Frank Baum, which is book 3 in the Wizard of Oz series, and this follows Dorothy being caught in a sea storm and washing ashore with Bellina the hen in the land of Ev. And then my birth tree is the Hazel Tree, so I chose The Hazel Wood by Melissa Albert, which is about Alice, who has spent most of her life on the road with bad luck biting her heels, and her luck gets worse when her mother is stolen away by a figure claiming to be from a supernatural world from Alice's grandmother's book. So Alice must must team up with a classmate who is also a super fan of Alice's grandmother's books to help figure out what happened. And then for name meaning, I have chosen Olive Grove and Ends by Moses Mackenzie, which is about Seon who wants to escape his life in a volatile Bristol neighbourhood and forge a better life with the girl he loves. But he's drawn into drug dealing with his cousin, and an altercation breaks out with a rival dealer when he's on the cusp of making a clean break. So for 22, this is backlist authors, so this is from authors you've liked in the past. So I've done Hide and Seek by Chris Carter, which is about a woman who's escaped an abusive marriage and has sent her husband to prison, been given a new identity to start a new life, but she knows how dangerous her ex-husband is and gets caught up in a game of cat and mouse with him. And then I've got After the Funeral by Agatha Christie and A Particularly Nasty Case by Adam Kay, both of which I've already covered. And then Heartstopper Volume 6 by Alice Oseman, which is the final instalment of the love story of Nick and Charlie. And then Family Business by Jonathan Sims. And this is about Dia, who after her best friend dies, her life feels like it's falling apart, so she joins a company that cleans up after the recently deceased. Dia begins to see more and more things that are hard to write off. A family who won't speak about their loss, and a man who keeps turning up at her jobs. Next is Pokemon types. So this is 5 books that link to 5 different types of Pokemon. All of these are ones I've already got somewhere else in the challenge. So we'll rattle this one off quickly. So for Grass, I've got The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. For Flying, I've got 6 Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lem. For Fighting, I've got A Parade of Horribles by Matt Dinnerman. For Water, I've got Chlorine by Jade Song. And for Dark, I've got Bury Your Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab. The next prompt is an anthology and its authors. So this is to select one anthology and then read 6 books by different authors within the anthology. I selected the first science fiction mega pack, which is a collection of 25 sci-fi short stories from popular authors from the 20th century. And then these 6 books I've picked from authors from that are I, Robot by Yando Binder, which is the first book in a series about Adam Ling, who is a robot made in the likeness of man who becomes self-aware. Then I've got Tau Zero by Paul Anderson. This is an epic space voyage where people are heading to a planet 30 light years away, but a space storm damages the deceleration unit on the ship, leaving them hurtling into deep space at the speed of light. Next is A Scanner Darkly by Philip K. Dick, and this is about Bob, an undercover narcotics agent trying to find the supply for Substance D, a drug that destroys the link between the hemispheres of the brain and eventually leads to permanent brain damage. To pass as an addict, he must start becoming a user, but gradually becomes dependent on the substance. Next is The Turing Option by Harry Harrison, which is about a young genius who develops a machine capable of spontaneous thought. Before he can perfect it, terrorists steal his research and put a bullet in his brain. He is miraculously revived, but must find his lost memories and discover who's trying to kill him. The Colours of Space by Marion Zimmer Bradley follows Bart Steele, who is on a ship travelling to 3 star systems and then to his destination. He's given the choice to sleep between the systems or sleep the whole way to his final destination, and he chooses the latter, knowing that he can't go out because he might be recognised. But as he's drifting off into unconsciousness, he realises that being unconscious the whole time puts him in just as much danger of being recognised while he's unconscious and unable to fight back. And Marooned on Mars by Lester Del Rey, which follows Chuck, who is a citizen of the moon and is commissioned as a crew member on a trip to Mars. He finds out that he's being replaced by an Earthling and chooses to stow away on the ship, but this causes the calculations for the fuel to be wrong and the ship to crash land on Mars. And the final prompt for the challenge is Second Chances and Hidden Gems. So there were a selection of different prompts for this one, but I managed to throw my own in there as well. First is a soft DNF, so this is a book you've soft DNF'd in the past, and this is going to sound really bad, but mine is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I'd picked this up at just a bad time for me, and I still do really want to read it. I just couldn't get into it at the time I tried to. But this is about a man who sells his soul so that a portrait of himself will age in place of him aging. Next is a book with an ugly cover, and I've picked A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain. And this is about a 19th century mechanic in New England getting a blow to the head and waking up in King Arthur's Camelot. He decides to try and modernise Camelot with 19th century inventions, but all hell breaks loose. For a random book, I just picked the first one that I looked at, and that was Ammonite by Nicola Griffiths. And this is On the Planet Jeep, a virus wiped out all the men, and Forever Altered, the few remaining women. Generations later, a new company arrives to try and exploit the planet, but terrified of spreading the virus, they abandon their employees. An anthropologist arrives to test a new vaccine and discover the women's biological secrets, risking her life in the process. Less than 100 reviews. I found a book called The Feminine Middlebrow Novel by Nicola Humble, which is an attempt to change the perspective on books made for women, basically. The prompt I added myself because I felt like it fit was an author I've disliked in the past, and I don't want to admit this, but for this I've picked Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro, because when I read Never Let Me Go, I really didn't like it, but I read this around the same time I tried to read Dorian Gray, so I think I was just in an era of awful taste, so I am going to give it another shot at some point, because anything I read in that period of time should not be counted. So that is everything I'm planning on reading for HRCYED. I'm planning on trying to maybe do like a weekly video of what I've read, how I'm keeping up with it, and I'm kind of dreading it honestly, but we can do this, right? Thank you so much for watching. If you want to hear more about my reading, and probably mainly about HRCYED, feel free to subscribe, so I will keep you updated on how this goes, I guess.